There are mistakes you make once and swear you'll never repeat. Leaving a candle burning next to a stack of printed manuscripts is, apparently, not one of those mistakes for me. But here's the thing. If the consequence of one very small, very preventable apartment fire is a firefighter showing up at your door who looks like she was carved out of marble by someone with very strong opinions about jawlines, maybe the mistake wasn't that bad after all.
Hi girls and boys, how are you all doing? Before I continue, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments. Are you a soccer fan or do you just show up for the World Cup energy? Because this whole story starts exactly there. Welcome to Jade and Hale's story. I think you're gonna love this one.
Jade Ellis had a theory about herself. The universe, for reasons she had never successfully identified, found her personally entertaining. It wasn't that she was careless. She preferred the term creatively distracted. There was a difference. That Tuesday night felt ordinary. She'd come home from 3 back-to-back client calls, hungry, tired, and completely unwilling to engage with anything that required more than 4 steps. The candle on her desk had been burning since noon, lavender and cedarwood, because inspiration has a scent, and that was a hill she would die on. The stack of printed drafts next to it had been sitting there since last Thursday. These 2 facts had coexisted peacefully for days. Until they didn't. The smell reached her first. Then the smoke alarm, which went off with the enthusiasm of something that had been waiting years for exactly this moment. She ran from the bedroom, found the corner of her desk doing something it absolutely should not have been doing, grabbed the nearest thing with any moisture in it, which turned out to be a half-empty mug of cold coffee, threw it at the situation, and stood there with both hands on her head for approximately 5 seconds before the building's main alarm joined in. The neighbors arrived with the speed that neighbors always reserve exclusively for emergencies and never for anything pleasant. The building manager came first. The couple from 4B arrived shortly after, clearly mid-dinner. And then, because the universe operates without mercy, the truck pulled up outside. Jade heard the engine before she saw the lights. Red and white reflections moved across her living room wall like something out of a movie she had not agreed to be in. She opened her apartment door and stood in the hallway in her oversized Portland Timbers t-shirt, hair in a knot that had given up on itself 2 hours ago, doing her best to project the energy of someone who had complete control of the situation. She was not succeeding. The firefighters came up the stairs with that particular presence, the kind that fills a hallway without making any effort. Equipment, posture, movement with no wasted steps. Jade took 2 involuntary steps back just from the general atmosphere of it all. And then Hale Carter walked into her apartment. Tall. Blonde hair pulled back at the base of her neck, a few strands loose at the temples. Eyes so green they registered before anything else. Steady, efficient, the kind of eyes that took stock of a room in under 3 seconds and gave absolutely nothing away in return. And a jaw that could have been a geometry exercise. She moved through the doorway like the space had been expecting her. Jade stood very still and thought, this person cannot be real. Are you the resident? Hale asked, already moving toward the desk, already assessing, not particularly waiting for the answer to catch up with her. Jade took a beat longer than necessary to respond. Yes, she said, and immediately noticed she had used a slightly higher register than her normal speaking voice, which she corrected internally and at once. Hale examined the desk, the burned manuscript corner, the candle. She ran 2 fingers along the surface of the wood, checked the window latch, looked at the ceiling. The calm she operated with was the kind that should come with some kind of formal warning. Candle too close to paper, she said, turning back toward Jade without any particular judgment in her tone. Jade crossed her arms with what she intended to be an air of complete dignity. It was a creative proximity decision, she said, holding eye contact without blinking. Hale stopped. Just for a second. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close enough that Jade noticed it, filed it, and stored it somewhere she didn't examine too closely. Creative, Hale repeated slowly, as though weighing the word with some care. Exactly. Jade confirmed, with a steadiness that had absolutely no business existing given the state of her desk. Hale finished the inspection, cleared the apartment, and spoke briefly with the building manager in the hallway. Jade stayed in the doorway because it was technically necessary to remain available for the process. Not because Hale Carter had the most precisely composed posture she had seen in recent memory. That had nothing to do with it. When Hale returned to hand over the clearance form, she stopped at a reasonable distance and looked at Jade with that serious expression that Jade had already, in the span of roughly 12 minutes, catalogued as inconveniently attractive. "Keep the candles away from anything flammable," she said, voice low and direct. "Ideally, away from everything." Jade raised her chin. "I'll switch to a diffuser," she said, completely serious. "Less romantic, statistically safer." The smile appeared this time, quick, controlled, but real, and it left with Hale, who said goodnight, turned around, and walked down the stairs without looking back. Jade stood in the doorway until the sound of boots on the stairwell faded. Then she closed the door, leaned against it, and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. "Universe," she said, to no one in particular, "you have a terrible sense of humor." But she was smiling, and that she couldn't argue with. She found a granola bar in the back of a kitchen drawer, went to bed, and fell asleep with the quiet certainty that she would never see that woman again. The universe, of course, found that absolutely hilarious. Jade Ellis had one very simple survival rule: never talk about a beautiful woman in a public place. She forgot that rule completely the following morning. That was Mary's fault. Her sister had a supernatural ability to call at exactly the wrong moment. Not occasionally, not sometimes, but with a consistency that suggested either a gift or a very dedicated surveillance operation. And that Wednesday morning, the wrong moment was the line outside McGinty's sports bar, where a crowd had already formed 2 hours before the USA versus Portugal World Cup qualifying match. The line stretched half a block down the sidewalk. Nobody was leaving. The energy was somewhere between a tailgate and a minor civic event. Jade's phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. She answered without looking at the name, because she already knew. "Mary, I was literally about to call you," she said, tucking the phone between her shoulder and ear while attempting to shuffle forward with the line. "You were not. Tell me what happened last night. My neighbor texted me that she saw a fire truck outside your building." Jade sighed with her entire body. It was nothing. A candle got too close to some papers. 2 seconds of silence on the other end. Then, "The manuscripts." "Those same ones," Jade confirmed. Mary's laugh was loud enough that the woman in front of her in line turned around to look. "Jade Ellis, you are a walking liability." "I prefer creatively distracted," she corrected with dignity. "And stop laughing because the story gets better." "Better how?" Jade lowered her voice. Not enough, as it turned out. But she didn't know that yet. The line still hadn't moved, and the sidewalk was packed. The fire department came, obviously. Standard procedure. She kept her tone casual, examining the McGinty sign above the entrance like it was suddenly very interesting. One of them came in to do the inspection. And Jade paused. "Mary, I need you to understand that I was not prepared." "For what?" "She walked into my apartment," Jade said, and the words came out considerably more enthusiastic than she had planned. "And I genuinely could not locate a complete sentence for about 30 seconds. We're talking blonde hair, green eyes, a jaw that should be in a museum somewhere." Mary made a sound that was not quite a word. "Full Greek goddess energy," Jade continued, because she was already in it, and there was no tactical retreat available. "The kind of woman that makes you reconsider every decision that led you to be standing in your apartment in a Timbers t-shirt with 3-day-old hair. Did you get her number?" "She told me to keep candles away from paper and left," Jade. She was professional. She was calm. She had the most infuriating green eyes I have ever encountered in my life, and she just walked back down the stairs like it was nothing. Mary groaned. "You didn't even introduce yourself?" I told her the manuscripts were a creative proximity decision, and she almost smiled. "That's what I have." "That is the saddest thing you've ever said to me." "It was still worth it," Jade said. With the practical philosophy she applied to all situations that couldn't be reversed. The apartment almost burned down, but at least the firefighter was... She stopped. Not because she ran out of words. Because the line moved, she took a step forward and turned around. The woman standing behind her in line was holding a coffee cup with a patience that bordered on architectural. Blonde hair loose at the shoulders today, no jacket, just a dark green Henley, and the same steady green eyes that had swept Jade's apartment in under 3 seconds 48 hours ago. Hale Carter, in line, behind her. For how long? Jade had absolutely no idea. The silence between them lasted 4 seconds. Jade counted. Hale's expression was not surprise. It was something considerably more inconvenient than surprise. Controlled amusement, sitting right at the corner of her mouth, not quite committing to a smile, but clearly considering it. "Greek goddess," Hale said slowly, the way someone repeats a phrase they want to make sure they've heard correctly. It was not a question. The heat that climbed Jade's neck arrived faster than she considered fair. She had 2 options. She could dissolve into the sidewalk somewhere between the entrance and the crosswalk, or she could be exactly who she was. She chose the second one. She straightened her spine, looked directly into those green eyes without flinching, and said, "Full mythology. I stand by every word." Hale blinked once, and then, for the second time in less than 48 hours, that smile appeared. Slower this time. More deliberate, like she wasn't entirely able to stop it. "The details matter," she said, and her voice carried that dry, unhurried quality that Jade was beginning to recognize as simply how she spoke. Always. Like she had decided exactly what she was going to say before she opened her mouth. "They do," Jade agreed, without breaking eye contact. The line moved. The entrance called. Jade turned back around, walked to the door with a composure she considered genuinely heroic given the circumstances, handed over her ticket, and found a spot inside without looking back. She lasted 4 minutes before she texted Mary. She was behind me in line, heard everything. The response came in 3 seconds. "Jade Ellis. I cannot believe you." Jade put her phone face down on the bar, ordered a soda water, and stared at the screen above the bar, where the pre-match coverage was already running. She was not smiling. She was absolutely smiling. The universe, she was beginning to understand, didn't just have a terrible sense of humor. It had a terrible sense of humor and an unlimited amount of free time. And it was, quite clearly, just getting started. The move happened on a Friday afternoon, announced by the sound of boxes being dragged across hardwood, one muffled curse word, and the unmistakable scrape of furniture against a hallway that was not built for furniture. Jade opened her apartment door, expecting to find almost anything else. The woman wrestling a large cardboard box through the corridor looked to be in her early 30s, dark hair and a lopsided bun, the expression of someone who was exhausted and would not be admitting that under any circumstances. When she looked up and saw Jade standing in the doorway, she dropped the box on the floor with a satisfying thud and extended her hand like they were meeting at a networking event and not in a hallway surrounded by packing tape and mild chaos. "Nora," she said, "moving into 4C. You must be my new neighbor." "Jade," she replied, shaking her hand and already, somehow, liking this person. "Do you need help?" "Desperately. But my sister said she'd come by later." Nora looked at the pile of boxes still waiting at the end of the corridor with the philosophical acceptance of someone who had made peace with her situation. "She's a firefighter, so the schedule is always a surprise." Jade went very still. The universe didn't even bother being subtle about it this time. "Firefighter," she repeated, in a voice she intended to sound completely neutral. "Yeah, Hale. You know her." Nora was already opening another box, not particularly paying attention to Jade's expression, which was fortunate. "By sight," Jade said, which was technically accurate and left out approximately 100% of the relevant context. Hale arrived 2 hours later. Jade was in her kitchen making coffee when she heard the voice in the hallway. Unhurried, low, with that particular quality of calm she had already catalogued without meaning to. She stood completely still for a moment, mug in hand, and then made a very mature and reasonable decision. She didn't go out into the hallway, but she left her door slightly open. It could have been coincidence. She chose not to examine that too closely. The universe, now apparently committed to a schedule, established a new routine over the following days that operated entirely without Jade's input or consent. Monday morning, she stepped into the elevator, and the doors were almost closed when a hand appeared in the gap and pushed them back open. Hale stepped in with a bag over one shoulder, saw who was already inside, and that corner of her mouth moved before she could stop it. "Morning," she said, positioning herself beside Jade with a calm that Jade found unreasonably irritating. "Morning," Jade replied, and looked at the floor panel like the numbers were doing something fascinating. The elevator descended in silence for 2 floors. "No incidents this week?" Hale asked, and Jade didn't need to look over to know she was wearing that expression. Serious on the surface, something else underneath. "The week is young," Jade said, completely straight-faced. Hale laughed. A short, quiet sound, genuine and unguarded, the kind that escapes before a person decides to let it. Jade filed it away in the same place she kept the smile, and didn't ask herself why. Wednesday was the parking garage. Jade was attempting to reverse into a spot that required a level of spatial reasoning she was not prepared to offer at 7:45 in the morning. She was on her 3rd attempt when she caught movement in the rear-view mirror. Hale was leaning against the concrete pillar behind her, with her arms crossed, watching the maneuvers with an expression of complete, unhurried patience. Jade reversed again. Hale didn't move. She tried a different angle. Hale remained exactly where she was. After the 5th attempt, Jade put the car in park at an angle that was functional, but not particularly beautiful, got out with her bag on her shoulder, and walked past Hale with her chin up. "Looks great," Hale said, when Jade had taken exactly 3 steps. Jade stopped, turned around slowly, found those green eyes full of an amusement that Hale wasn't trying very hard to hide anymore. "Thank you," Jade said, with a smile that was half irony and half something she decided not to analyze. Hale tilted her head slightly, still with that expression, and walked off in the opposite direction. Friday was the building gym. Jade was on the treadmill when Hale came in. She kept her eyes forward with a discipline she considered admirable. Hale acknowledged her with a nod and went to the free weights without a word, which was somehow worse than if she had said something. Jade maintained her focus for 14 minutes, which she later decided deserved some kind of recognition. On the 15th minute, the treadmill next to her started up. She glanced sideways. It wasn't Hale. It was someone she recognized vaguely from the night of the fire. Younger, easy smile, the kind of person who fills a room just by showing up and doesn't appear to put any effort into it. "Hey," he said, activating the treadmill with the confidence of someone who was going to talk to her regardless. "You're Jade, right? Nora's neighbor." "That's me," she said, keeping her pace. "Teo," he said, extending his hand even though they were both in motion, which she found entertaining enough to shake. "I work with Hale. She mentioned you." Jade raised an eyebrow. "What did she say?" "That the new neighbor was—" he started, then glanced sideways for half a second before finishing. "Funny." The pause before funny was small. Jade noted it and said nothing. "Teo was easy company, relaxed, conversational, not once crossing a line. But at some point he looked over with a sideways smile and said, without any particular weight behind it, "Hale wasn't exaggerating, by the way. You're genuinely cool." Jade was opening her mouth to respond when a sound came from across the room, a weight returning to the rack with slightly more force than the situation required. Both of them looked. Hale was standing a few meters away, her expression not quite neutral. She held it for a second, then shifted her eyes briefly to Jade, picked up her water bottle, and turned toward Teo with a tone that was measured and direct. "Schedule changed for tomorrow," she said. "I'll send you the updated rotation." Teo looked at her, then at Jade, then back at Hale, with the expression of someone who understood exactly what was happening and was enjoying every second of it. "Copy that," he said pleasantly. Hale didn't respond. She picked up her towel, let her gaze pass one more time over the two of them on the treadmills, and left the gym with that unhurried, certain stride that somehow filled the hallway even after the door had closed. Teo waited a full 5 seconds. Then he turned to Jade with a wide, delighted smile. "Nothing," he said, before she could ask. "Absolutely nothing going on there." Jade stepped off the treadmill, grabbed her towel, and walked out with the very clear sense that it was the exact opposite of nothing. That night, she lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling for a long time. The apartment was quiet, but on the other side of the wall, very close, was Nora's apartment. And in Jade's head, just as close, was the image of a weight hitting a rack harder than necessary, and a pair of green eyes that hadn't been quite neutral. She closed her eyes and tried not to smile. She didn't manage it. And this time she didn't try to convince herself it didn't mean anything. The idea for the night out came from Nora, as all ideas that disrupted the natural order of things tended to do. It was a Saturday afternoon when she knocked on Jade's door with the energy of someone who had already decided everything and was simply completing the formality of informing the other party. "A friend of mine is celebrating tonight," she said, leaning against the door frame with a smile that did not accept no as a grammatically valid response. "Good place, good music, good people. You're coming." Jade raised an eyebrow. Was that an invitation or a summons? "Both," Nora said, without a trace of apology. Jade went. What she did not calculate, while choosing the dark green dress that fit well in all the right places and left her shoulders bare, was that Hale would be there. She discovered this in the building hallway when the three of them arrived at the elevator at the same time. Hale was in a black shirt, dark-fitted pants, hair down, loose at the shoulders in a way that was different from the ponytail and the bun in every other version Jade had catalogued so far. No gear, no jacket, no uniform. Just her. Which turned out to be considerably more difficult to be standing next to. The elevator doors opened. Hale looked at Jade, and for a second, brief, controlled, the kind most people would have missed, her eyes moved and then settled. Jade noticed. Of course she noticed. "Evening," Jade said, stepping in with a composure she was quietly proud of. "Evening," Hale replied, half a register lower than the situation required. Nora stepped in behind them both, looked from one to the other with the expression of someone watching a very interesting chess match, and said absolutely nothing, which communicated everything. The venue was warm and low-lit, the kind of place where the music was loud enough to matter, but not so loud that a conversation became a physical effort. Nora found her friend within 30 seconds of walking in, and disappeared into the crowd with a promise to return, that Jade correctly assessed would take some time. She and Hale stood side by side for a moment. "Drink?" Hale asked, with that direct simplicity she applied to everything. "Please," Jade said. They went to the bar, ordered, and something happened that Jade had not anticipated. The conversation came easily. Not the careful, measured exchanges of the elevator or the parking garage. Something looser, more natural. Hale asked about her work. Jade asked about the rotation schedule, about what a shift actually looked like from the inside. There was something about the absence of the building, the hallway, the context of neighbor and firefighter that made everything feel slightly more real. Hale said something dry and understated, and Jade laughed before she could think about it. Hale looked at her when she laughed. Not quickly, not briefly, and then looked away. That was the exact moment the man appeared. He arrived from Jade's left, well-dressed, with the ease of someone accustomed to walking into any room like he'd reserved it in advance. He extended a drink toward her with a smile that had been calibrated for maximum effect. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, looking only at Jade. "I just had to come over." Jade accepted neither the drink nor the premise. "Thank you," she said, politely and without warmth. He didn't read the room. He kept talking, kept smiling, repositioned himself slightly closer. Jade responded with the precise level of courtesy that communicated no interest while maintaining basic civility. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Hale shift slightly beside her, not moving away, not saying anything, but the tension that entered her shoulders was visible enough to register. Then Jade glanced to her left and saw something that made her stomach do something she refused to name. A woman had found Hale in the exact moment Hale had taken one step sideways. Dark hair, long, hand resting on Hale's arm, eyes fixed on her face with an expression that required no translation. Jade turned back to the man in front of her and kept her face very still. She was not jealous. She refused to call it that. It was an observation. An observation she made 3 times while pretending to listen to someone she had no interest in. Across the bar, Hale was responding to the woman with visible politeness, but her body was angled slightly wrong, like she was turned away from a conversation she hadn't chosen. Or Jade was projecting. She was possibly projecting. The man touched her elbow lightly, requesting her attention, and suggested they dance with a smile that clearly expected agreement. "No, thank you," Jade said, simply and directly. He persisted. His hand moved to her waist with the familiarity of someone who had not processed the word no. Jade was 2 seconds away from handling it herself, and she would have, when she felt a presence arrive beside her. Close, solid, with a specific warmth she had learned to recognize without looking. "Excuse me," said Hale, in a voice that had not increased in volume by a single degree, but had changed completely in texture. The man looked at her, made a rapid assessment, and made the intelligent decision to take his drink and disappear into the crowd. Jade turned to Hale. She was looking at the space where the man had been, jaw set, expression controlled in the way that Jade now knew required actual effort. "I had it," Jade said. "I know," Hale replied, turning to look at her. "I was closer." The reasoning was sound. The voice was slightly rougher than the reasoning required. Jade crossed her arms. "And the woman at the bar?" she asked, with a lightness that cost her something. Hale blinked. "What woman?" "Dark hair, hand on your arm, very focused on your face." Jade said it in a tone she recognized, about half a second too late, as more revealing than she intended. A small silence settled between them inside all that music. Hale looked at her with an expression Jade couldn't immediately catalog. It wasn't surprise. It was closer to recognition, the look of someone who has just had something confirmed that they already suspected. "You were watching," Hale said slowly. Not a question. Jade opened her mouth, closed it, and chose the most honest available path. "So were you," she said. The silence came back. Shorter this time. Heavier. The music shifted to something slower, and Nora materialized from the left, with a drink in her hand, and the expression of someone who was not even slightly surprised by what she was walking into. "You two are exhausting," she said, to both of them simultaneously, with the particular brand of honesty that only a sister delivers without asking permission. I'm going to dance. Sort this out. And she was gone. Hale looked at the space where Nora had been. Then she looked at Jade. Jade held the look. Everything that had been accumulating, the elevator, the parking garage, the gym, each small exchange and each loaded silence, was present in that moment, between them, under the low light and the slower music. Hale took one step toward her. Just one. But it was the right one. You know I can't stand watching someone make you uncomfortable, she said, voice low, meant only for Jade. Direct in the way she was direct about everything. Without performance, without detour. You know that, right? Jade's chest did something she decided not to analyze right now. She raised her chin and looked straight into those green eyes that had never once looked away from her first. Then imagine how I felt watching that woman with her hand on your arm, she said, with the same honesty. Because Jade Ellis did not retreat. She never had. She was not about to start. The silence lasted less than 5 seconds. Then Hale raised her hand and touched Jade's face, carefully, with a gentleness that had no business belonging to hands that steady and that strong. She tilted her head and kissed her. It was not a hesitant kiss. It was the kiss of someone who had waited long enough and made a decision. Present. Certain. Carrying everything that had been unsaid across every elevator ride and every sidewalk and every carefully maintained distance. Jade stayed still for half a second, then placed her hand against Hale's collarbone and felt her heart beating at exactly the same accelerated pace as her own, and kissed her back with the same honesty she had brought to everything since the night this had started. When they pulled apart, the music was still playing. The party was still happening. The world had been decent enough to keep going without making a production of it. Hale looked at her, green eyes open in a way Jade hadn't seen before. More unguarded, more real. Took long enough, Jade said, because it was true, and because it was exactly the right thing to say. Hale exhaled a quiet laugh, the kind that comes out before a person decides to allow it. That candle has a lot to answer for, she said. I wasn't planning on this. Jade felt the smile arrive before she could stop it. Planning is overrated, she said. Across the room, Nora stood with her drink and the expression of someone whose work was complete. Teo, who had appeared at some point beside her, looked at the two of them, and then at Nora with a wide grin. Finally, he said. An embarrassingly long time coming, Nora agreed, and raised her glass. Nobody in the building needed to be officially informed. These things never do. By Sunday morning, Mrs. Calloway on the 4th floor already knew. The couple in 2A already knew. Frank at the front desk, who had known everything before everyone else for reasons nobody had ever been able to satisfactorily explain, had apparently known before it even happened, which Jade chose not to examine too closely. She found out about Frank when she came downstairs to pick up a package, and he received her with a smile that was warm, conspiratorial, and entirely unsolicited. Morning, Ms. Ellis, he said, handing over the package with the expression of a man in possession of information he was very pleased about. Morning, Frank, she replied, in a tone designed to close the subject. Beautiful day out there, he offered, looking toward the entrance with satisfaction disproportionate to the weather. Lovely, she agreed, tucking the package under her arm and leaving with her dignity intact. Behind her, Frank hummed something cheerful. She pretended not to hear it. The relationship started without a formal conversation, without a long discussion about definitions or expectations or what any of it meant. It started the way things between them had always started, practically, directly, with something at least mildly comedic involved. 2 days after the party, Hale showed up at Jade's door with a paper bag from the hardware store. I brought glass, she said, when Jade opened the door. Jade looked at the bag, then at Hale. You brought what? Glass containers. Hale held the bag up slightly. For the kitchen. To replace whatever you're currently using that could be a fire hazard. Jade stood in the doorway for 3 full seconds, attempting to maintain a neutral expression. You bought me kitchen containers. Preventive measure, Hale said without blinking. Cheaper than a second call-out. Jade laughed. Sudden, unplanned, the kind that arrives before you decide to allow it. She stepped back, opened the door fully, and Hale walked in with the bag, and that half-smile she had stopped trying to contain quite so aggressively. They had dinner that night, and the night after that, and the glass containers stayed on the kitchen shelf like a quiet, practical piece of evidence of something neither of them had bothered to put into words yet, because the words weren't necessary. And if you want more stories like this one, but with every detail I had to leave out of here, I have a Patreon. The link is right below. Okay, let's keep going. The chaos continued, because Jade was who she was, and the universe had established its habits. In the first week, she locked herself out of her apartment in a manner she still could not explain to anyone's satisfaction, including her own. Hale retrieved the spare key from Frank, came upstairs, opened the door, and stood in the entrance with her arms crossed, and an expression of genuine, unhurried curiosity. How? She said, not accusatory, actually curious. It doesn't matter, Jade replied, walking past her with the dignity the situation allowed, which was limited. It matters a great deal, Hale said, following her inside with poorly concealed amusement. Hale, I'm not leaving until you explain it. That's not... I have nowhere to be. She sat on the sofa with the tranquility of someone with unlimited time. Jade explained. Hale laughed for 2 full minutes. A real laugh, unguarded and unhurried, the kind that takes over a person completely. Jade pretended to find it irritating. She did not find it irritating. In the second week, the shower stopped working on a Monday morning at 6 a.m., with Jade inside it and shampoo in her hair. She called Hale with the voice of someone maintaining calm through sheer force of will. Talk to me, Hale answered, already awake, already in that direct assessment mode that skipped straight past pleasantries. The shower stopped. I have conditioner in my hair and a meeting at 8. A pause. I'm not panicking. I'm informing you. A brief silence. On my way, Hale said, and hung up. She arrived in 4 minutes. She identified the problem, made a temporary fix that was sufficient for Jade to finish her shower. And by the time Jade came out of the bathroom, Hale was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee and the calm, settled presence of someone who had always been there. Jade stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at her for a moment that Hale didn't notice. There was something about the image that was simultaneously new and completely familiar, like the apartment, which had been hers alone for 3 years, had quietly decided it had been missing something, and simply added it without asking. Coffee, Hale said, without looking up, pushing 1 mug across the table toward her. Thank you, Jade said, sitting down, wrapping both hands around the mug, and deciding not to spend more than 10 seconds analyzing how much she liked that scene. She spent considerably more than 10 seconds. The days settled into a rhythm with that specific pace that time takes when things are going well, moving faster than you want them to, in a direction you don't want to question too hard, in case the questioning disrupts something. Mornings in the elevator became good morning with a brief kiss before the doors opened. Runs into each other in the garage became shared rides when the schedules aligned. The building gym became 3 sessions a week together, where Hale pretended not to watch Jade on the treadmill, and Jade pretended not to watch Hale at the weights, and both of them were fully aware of exactly what was happening. Nora observed all of it with the satisfaction of someone who had planted something, and was monitoring the growth with personal pride. You two are the most wholesome thing in this building, she announced one afternoon when the 3 of them were on the rooftop terrace, the city spread out below them in the early evening light. We're not wholesome, Jade said immediately. Definitely not, Hale agreed from across the table, with identical conviction. Nora looked from one to the other with an enormous smile. They had answered at exactly the same time, in exactly the same tone, with exactly the same energy. "Completely wholesome," she said. "Disgustingly so." Jade and Hale looked at each other. Jade raised an eyebrow. Hale did that thing with the corner of her mouth. They both looked away at the same moment, which was considerably less convincing than either of them intended. Nora took a long sip of her drink with the expression of someone who had won something significant and was not going to be modest about it. Weeks later, on a night when the city had gone cold without warning and Jade was on the sofa with a blanket and a book she wasn't really reading, her phone lit up. "You still up?" It was Hale. "Yes," Jade replied. The doorbell rang 30 seconds later. Hale was at the door in a jacket, hands in her pockets, with an expression Jade hadn't seen before. Not the professional calm, not the controlled amusement, something quieter, more internal. "Everything okay?" Jade asked. "Yeah," Hale said. "I just didn't want to be in my apartment." Jade looked at her for a moment, then opened the door all the way. Hale came in, sat on the sofa. Jade returned to her spot with the blanket, closer than before. They put something on the television that neither of them watched with any real attention, and stayed like that for a long time, in a silence that had nothing uncomfortable in it. At some point, without planning or announcement, Jade's head came to rest on Hale's shoulder. Hale didn't say anything. She just shifted slightly and put her arm around Jade with the natural ease of someone who had been doing it for years. Jade looked at the television and thought that this was the kind of moment that looks simple from the outside and is something else entirely from the inside. The kind you don't forget, not because it was dramatic, but because it was exactly right. She fell asleep before the program ended. Hale stayed awake for a long time after. She looked at Jade, then at the apartment, the glass containers on the kitchen shelf, the open package in the corner of the living room, the jacket on the chair in the way it was always left. She looked at all of it, and then back at Jade, and something settled in her chest with a clarity that was almost startling in how quiet it was. Not tonight, not with any rush, but soon. Hale Carter was not someone who did things halfway. When she decided something, she decided it completely. No hesitation, no detour, none of the particular kind of doubt that stalls people in the middle of their own lives. That was how she worked. In the job and in everything else. And sitting on that sofa on a cold night with Jade asleep on her shoulder, she was absolutely certain. The building's annual party was that weekend. It was the kind of event that the residents took seriously with a dedication Jade had always found equal parts excessive and endearing. The rooftop terrace would have string lights, a grill, music, and the checkered tablecloths that Mrs. Calloway insisted on bringing every single year without exception or negotiation. Practically every resident would be there. It was, by any reasonable measure, perfect. Hale called Teo on Thursday morning. "I need a favor," she said directly, without preamble. On the other end, Teo was quiet for 2 seconds. Then he responded with the voice of someone who had been waiting for this call longer than was strictly reasonable. "Finally," he said. The plan came together faster than Hale expected. Teo recruited 2 colleagues from the station. Nora assumed command of the logistics with an efficiency that made clear she had inherited the same gene for doing things completely, or not at all. Frank secured the microphone and the portable speaker with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for an occasion worthy of the equipment since the building was constructed. Mrs. Calloway agreed to participate on the condition that the checkered tablecloths remained non-negotiable. Hale accepted without discussion. Jade suspected nothing. Or at least that was what Hale believed until Saturday afternoon, when Jade appeared on the rooftop in a rust-colored dress that did something very specific to the early evening light, and looked at Hale with that direct, unhurried attention that Hale had learned never to underestimate. "You're looking at me differently," Jade said, arriving beside her with a glass of sparkling water and that precise, undeceivable perception that was simply part of who she was. "I'm looking at you the same way I always do," Hale said. Jade narrowed her eyes slightly. Hale held the look with an innocence that cost her a measurable amount of effort. Jade decided to let it go, because she knew exactly when to press and when to wait. And there was something in Hale's expression she couldn't fully read, which was rare enough to make her curious without making her uneasy. The party moved with the energy specific to places where people genuinely know each other. Laughter crossing the terrace, kids running between tables, the smell of the grill mixing with the jasmine climbing up from the planter by the entrance. Jade talked with Mrs. Calloway about the recipe for the pound cake she brought every year. She helped Nora straighten a table that had been set up at a slight angle. At no point did she notice the looks being exchanged around her. It was Nora who appeared at her side with a carefully casual expression and said, "Frank's going to say something into the mic in a second. Stay right here." Jade stayed. The microphone feedback cut through the terrace once before Frank adjusted the volume with the seriousness of a man operating professional broadcast equipment. Conversations dropped. The kids stopped running with that instinctive collective awareness children have about important moments. Hale was no longer beside her. Jade looked around, didn't find her immediately, and felt something shift in her chest before she understood why. Then the screen that someone had set up on the terrace wall came to life. The first image was a photograph of Jade's desk, the burned corner of the manuscript stack, the melted candle, the coffee mug still sitting where she'd thrown it, with a caption written in large hand-lettered text, "Where it all started." The laughter was immediate. Jade's mouth fell open. The presentation continued with a narration she recognized as Teo's voice, pitched with the dramatic gravity of a nature documentary about an event of great historical significance. There were photographs of the building elevator, a comic reconstruction of the World Cup line scene, built entirely from paper cutout figures, unmistakably Nora's work, complete with speech bubbles reproducing the phone conversation with Mary in careful handwriting. Full Greek goddess energy. Read the jade paper cutout, in large, deliberate letters. The entire terrace erupted. Jade covered her face with both hands, feeling the heat rise up her neck. But the laugh came anyway. Helpless. Real. The kind that doesn't ask permission. The garage scene followed, reconstructed with a photo of her car still sitting at its memorable angle in the parking space. The gym, with a drawing of Teo on the treadmill, grinning enormously, while a figure clearly meant to be Hale stood in the background, with an expression that was comically accurate in its intensity. The night of the party, narrated with excessive drama and a music choice that Jade recognized as the most theatrical possible option available. Every scene pulled a new wave of laughter from the terrace. And then the screen went dark. The music stopped. Jade lowered her hands from her face, still laughing, eyes bright. And in that exact moment, she felt a presence behind her. She turned around slowly. Hale was there, not with the professional calm, not with the controlled amusement, with the expression Jade had seen only once before, that night on the sofa, when Hale had thought she was asleep and hadn't known that Jade had woken for a few minutes and watched her without her knowing. Open, unguarded, entirely real. The terrace had gone quiet with that particular quality of silence that happens when everyone present understands something important is about to occur, and nobody wants to be the one who interrupts it. Hale looked at her as though no one else was there, and began to speak. "I walked into an apartment to do a routine inspection on a Tuesday night," she said, her voice low and steady, carried across the whole terrace by the microphone Frank had quietly passed to her. "I found a woman standing in her hallway in a Portland Timbers t-shirt who had put a candle next to a stack of manuscripts and was calling it a creative proximity decision." Soft laughter moved through the crowd. Jade did not look away from her. "I should have finished the inspection and forgotten the address," Hale continued. And her tone shifted slightly, quieter, more weighted, in the way that wasn't sadness, but was truth. "Instead, I spent more time than any reasonable person would admit thinking about the delivery order comment." Someone in the back of the terrace made a sound. They were immediately and firmly hushed by everyone around them. In the months after that, this woman locked herself out of her apartment in a way that has still not been adequately explained. The green eyes lit briefly with that warmth she gave only in full, only when she meant it. She flooded a bathroom. She required parking assistance on at least 4 documented occasions, and she turned every impossible situation into a reason I wanted to be close by. Jade felt her throat tighten in a way that was not unpleasant. "I work with emergencies," Hale said, a small pause that carried more than a long speech. "I learned early that what matters isn't avoiding the chaos. It's knowing who you want beside you when the chaos arrives." The terrace was completely still. Mrs. Calloway was holding her napkin with both hands. Nora's eyes were bright, and her smile was the smile of someone who had been waiting for this with considerable patience and zero doubt. Teo stood with his arms crossed, and an expression that mixed pride with the absolute conviction that he had played a meaningful role in something historic. Frank had one hand over his heart. Hale reached into her pocket. The ring was simple and perfect. A thin gold band with a single small stone, the kind of thing chosen with care and time and no interest in performance. She didn't rush. She looked at Jade for one more moment, like she wanted to keep the expression on her face before asking anything, and then lowered herself slowly onto one knee with the same steady, unaffected posture she brought to everything. No drama, no artifice, completely herself. The silence on the terrace reached a level Jade hadn't known was achievable outdoors. "Jade Ellis?" Hale said, looking up at her with those green eyes that had started everything on a Tuesday night that neither of them had seen coming. "Will you keep turning ordinary things into emergencies for the rest of our lives?" Jade stood completely still. Not from doubt. From one of those moments where everything pauses just long enough for you to feel exactly where you are and who you're with and how right it is. The rust-colored dress, the jasmine from the planter below, the smell of the grill, the quiet terrace. Mrs. Calloway with the napkin pressed to her mouth, Frank with his hand still on his chest, Nora not even attempting to hide that her eyes were full, and Hale Carter on one knee, with a ring and a question that was completely, entirely her, direct, honest, with humor and weight in equal measure. Jade felt the tear before she decided to let it go. She didn't try to stop it. She took one step forward, raised her hand, and touched Hale's face. "Only if you promise to keep showing up when I call," she said, her voice slightly unsteady, but her eyes clear and certain, the way they had always been. Hale slid the ring onto her finger with both hands, then rose and kissed her in the middle of the terrace, with the same honest certainty she had brought to everything from the very first night. No unnecessary ceremony, no performance, nothing more than what it was. The rooftop came apart. Applause, cheers, Mrs. Calloway fully surrendering the napkin, Teo shouting something that was swallowed by the general noise, Nora wrapping both arms around them before they had fully separated, with that particular sister energy that does not wait for an appropriate moment. When the terrace found its way back to the rhythm of a party, music returning, conversations resuming, the kids starting to run between the tables again, Jade stood with her hand slightly raised, looking at the ring for a quiet moment. Hale stood beside her. "You knew," Jade said. Not a question. "Knew what?" Hale replied, with that tone of complete innocence she had never once successfully pulled off. Jade laughed before she could stop it. "That I was going to say yes." Hale tilted her head slightly, with that small movement that Jade had learned always preceded something honest and direct. "I knew from the World Cup line," she said simply. Jade opened her mouth to respond, and at that exact moment her elbow caught the sparkling water glass sitting on the edge of the table beside her. It tipped. Hale's hand was there before it hit the ground, catching it by the base with a precision that had become something close to reflex after months of living adjacent to Jade Ellis and her relationship with inanimate objects. They both looked at the glass. then at each other. And they laughed at the same time. Deep, genuine, the kind of laugh that sounds completely different when you're laughing with exactly the right person. Hale set the glass back on the table. Jade looked at the hand that had caught it. Steady, certain. The hand that had put the ring on her finger and caught approximately 100 small things before that, since a Tuesday night and a candle and a desk that should have known better. Hale, she said. Jade, Hale replied. Thank you. She didn't ask for what. She didn't need to. She simply put her arm around Jade's shoulders with that easy, natural certainty, and they stayed there in the middle of the party while the jasmine rose from the planter below, and Mrs. Calloway finally, at long last, put the napkin down. The universe, Jade thought, had a terrible sense of humor. But on the right nights, with the right person, it also had absolutely perfect timing. And that was how a lavender cedarwood candle and a universe with no sense of boundaries conspired to create the most unlikely and most certain love this building had ever seen. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like and tell me in the comments what time you finished watching. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. Every week there's a new story here waiting for you. Thank you so much for your time. See you in the next one.